At first glance, it seems like nothing more than a historical artifact, a moment frozen in time, from 1890 Alabama. But hidden within this portrait lies a secret so devastating, so carefully concealed, that it remained invisible for 128 years. What truth could a single photograph hide for over a century? What detail could shatter everything we thought we knew about freedom, about survival, about the promises made after the Civil War? This is not just a story about a photograph. This is a story about what happens when we finally look closer. If you want to uncover stories that history tried to bury, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. You won't believe what we're about to reveal. Dr. Marcus Webb had examined thousands of photographs during his career as a Reconstruction-era historian, but on an August afternoon in 2018, while cataloging donations at the Montgomery Historical Society in Alabama, one studio portrait stopped him cold. The photograph showed a black family of 5 posed against a painted backdrop. Professional lighting, careful composition, expensive. The father stood dignified beside an ornate chair. The mother sat gracefully, hands folded. 3 children surrounded them, boy of 12, a girl of 9, a younger boy of 6. All wore fine clothing that spoke of prosperity. On the back, the Harris family, Montgomery, Alabama, June 1890. 25 years after emancipation, this family had clearly achieved success. But something troubled Marcus. The parents' eyes held weariness beneath the formal dignity. The children's smiles seemed rehearsed. The mother's hands were positioned with unnatural precision. Marcus pulled out his magnifying glass and examined the photograph closely. He studied faces, clothing, the backdrop. Then he focused on the mother's hands. His breath caught. On her left wrist, barely visible beneath lace trim, was a faint scar, a thin mark curving around her wrist, the signature of iron shackles. Marcus leaned closer, pulse racing. The scar was unmistakable. But this was 1890, 25 years after slavery ended. Such marks should have faded unless they were more recent. He examined her right wrist. Another scar, more hidden. Both wrists bore bondage marks. He shifted to the father's hand on the chair. The same faint scarring. Marcus sat back, heart pounding. This wasn't just a successful family portrait. These people were hiding something. If his suspicion was correct, they were escaped slaves posing as free citizens, carrying proof of bondage on their skin. They had walked into this studio, given a false name, and documented their new life. It was either extraordinary courage or desperate hope, proof to themselves that they had truly made it to freedom. Marcus immediately researched the Harris family. He searched census records, city directories, property registrations, church memberships, anything confirming their existence in Montgomery in 1890. Days passed. Every search came back empty. No Harris family matching this description appeared anywhere. No property, no business licenses, no voter registration, nothing. The absence was evidence itself. Prosperous free black families appeared in civic documents. Complete invisibility suggested deliberate hiding. Marcus expanded his search across Alabama, finding several Harris families, but none matched the photograph's ages or composition. Then Marcus changed his approach. What if Harris wasn't their real name? Escaped slaves commonly took new identities, new name, new city, new life. Praying no one asked questions. He contacted colleague Dr. Evelyn Torres, a specialist in photographic analysis and African-American migration. Evelyn examined high-resolution scans in her lab. The scarring is real, she confirmed. Both parents show marks consistent with long-term shackling. But look at the positioning. She pointed at the screen. The mother's wrists are angled to minimize scar visibility. The father's placement does the same. Those lace cuffs aren't decorative. They're concealing evidence. They knew the scars showed, Marcus said quietly. They tried hiding them. Evelyn zoomed in on the mother's wrist, but not completely. Any professional photographer would have noticed the scar and repositioned to hide it entirely, unless the family insisted on this exact pose. Why not hide them completely? Marcus wondered. Evelyn considered carefully. Maybe they wanted casual observers to miss them, but knew someday someone looking closely would see the truth. Maybe this photograph was insurance, proof of what they escaped, hidden in plain sight. Marcus felt chilled. We need to find who they really were, where they escaped from. He spent the next week in archives, searching plantation records and newspapers. If they'd escaped, there would be documentation. Even after 1865, owners hunted people who left, calling them absconded contracted workers. Finally, Marcus found it. Montgomery Advertiser, April 1889. Reward for Joseph and Ruth, contracted workers who abandoned obligations at Riverside Plantation, Georgia. March 1889. 3 children missing. Contact Thornton Estate. Joseph and Ruth, not Harris, escaped from Georgia 14 months before this photograph. The description continued. Joseph, age 35, carpenter. Ruth, age 30, seamstress. Dangerous fugitives. Dangerous for wanting freedom. Marcus contacted Georgia State Archives, requesting Riverside Plantation records. Within days, digitized documents revealed brutal machinery. Riverside operated on debt peonage, contracts binding formerly enslaved people in perpetual servitude, differing from slavery only in name. Records showed Joseph contracted in 1875, 10 years after emancipation. His contract claimed debts for food and shelter during transition to freedom. Ruth was contracted in 1876. They married in 1877, documented as if the owner's permission mattered. Each child's birth increased their debt. Ledgers showed charges for midwives, extra rations, lost productivity. First child, 1878. Second, 1881. Third, 1884. Each birth added $50 to $75. Impossible amounts when labor was credited at pennies daily. The arithmetic was designed to be inescapable. Marcus traced their account balances year by year. Despite constant labor, debt grew. By 1889, Joseph and Ruth owed over $800. They would need decades more work, and new charges ensured they never succeeded. The contracts were legal masterpieces, dense language appearing legitimate while creating permanent bondage. Joseph and Ruth agreed to work until debts fully satisfied, with the owner having sole authority over amounts and satisfaction. No appeals, no oversight, no escape. Worse were provisions allowing transfer of obligations, meaning they could be sold, though paperwork called it contract assignment. Marcus found evidence of 3 transfers between 1875 and 1885 before Riverside. Plantation records showed Joseph and Ruth present for work. March 12, 1889. By March 13th, they'd vanished with 3 children. Immediate search organized. Law enforcement notified. Rewards posted across Georgia and Alabama. But they'd planned carefully. March was planting season. Plantations focused on crops. Guards watched fields, not quarters. Joseph's carpentry skills meant knowing how to move silently, avoid roads, cover tracks. Montgomery was 100 miles from Riverside, reachable on foot in 2 weeks. Traveling nights, hiding days. Far enough owners might not search immediately. Montgomery had growing black community where newcomers could blend, find work, disappear. With Joseph's carpentry and Ruth's sewing skills, they possessed marketable talents requiring no references. Construction boom meant work without questions. Cash payment, no documentation. In black communities, good work mattered more than papers. By July 1889, church records showed Harris, Joseph Carpenter, joining Dexter Avenue Baptist. They'd made it. They disappeared successfully. Marcus pieced together how Joseph and Ruth survived those first desperate months. With marketable skills, they found work quickly. Joseph on construction sites where bosses cared about ability, not background. Ruth taking sewing at home while watching children. No references needed, just good work and word of mouth. Church records from Dexter Avenue Baptist, July 1889. Harris, Joseph, carpenter, wife Ruth, seamstress, 3 children. No prior address, no previous affiliation documented. They chose Harris carefully, common enough not to attract attention. Not so common anyone would question it. Arrived late March or April 1889. Found work immediately. Felt secure enough by July to join church. Significant step showing they believed they'd successfully disappeared. but fear remained constant. Every door knock could be slave catchers, operating as contracted worker recovery agents. Every white stranger could represent Thornton Estate. Every newspaper might carry descriptions, real names, rewards. The June 1890 studio photograph took new meaning. 14 months after escape, they'd saved enough for professional portraits. Fine clothing, formal setting, careful composition. Extraordinary achievement. But more than achievement, it was defiance. Walking into that studio as the Harris family, they declared freedom, created proof they existed with new identity, new life. The photograph was documentation, evidence, claim to legitimacy. Marcus understood now why they positioned themselves carefully, why scars remained partially visible, hiding from the world but not from history. Perhaps hoping someday someone would look closely enough to see truth, understand what they'd escaped, what courage it took building this life. Evelyn discovered more. Montgomery City Directories, 1891, listed Joseph Harris operating small carpentry shop on Commerce Street. By 1893, Harris Carpentry, custom furniture and home repairs, not just surviving, thriving, building legitimate business under chosen names, but fear never disappeared. No property records in their name. They rented, avoiding permanent documentation. No voter registration despite black men having that right in 1890s Alabama. No business licenses requiring extensive paperwork. They remained invisible while building life. The studio portrait represented peak of their success and greatest vulnerability. Formal documentation of the Harris family meant permanent record that could someday be discovered. But they took that risk, needing proof for themselves, for their children, that they were truly free. Marcus found school enrollment records. September 1889. 3 Harris children enrolled at Centenary Methodist Church School. Oldest boy, James Harris, 11 girl. Elizabeth Harris, 8. Youngest William Harris, 5. Got them false names like parents, but real education, real opportunity, consistent attendance through early 1890s. These children learning to read, write, skills parents likely never fully acquired. This was why Joseph and Ruth risked everything. Marcus's research took devastating turn when Evelyn found a death notice. Montgomery Examiner, February 1897. Harris Ruth, age 38, suddenly survived by husband Joseph and 3 children. Services at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Marcus read it repeatedly, heart sinking. Ruth died just 8 years after escaping to freedom, at only 38. Suddenly suggested accident or acute illness, not prolonged sickness. The studio portrait from 1890 had captured Ruth in one of her few moments of peace. 7 years later, she was gone, leaving Joseph to raise 3 children alone, under false identity, still fearful of discovery. Harris carpentry business disappeared from city directories after 1897. Church records showed Joseph through 1898, then nothing. Children's school enrollment ended 1897. The family had left Montgomery entirely, perhaps unable to sustain themselves after Ruth's death, perhaps finally discovered by Thornton agents. Evelyn suggested searching other cities where Alabama black families commonly migrated: Atlanta, Birmingham, Nashville, northern cities like Chicago and Detroit. Weeks passed with nothing. Then, genealogist Dr. Patricia Holmes in Philadelphia emailed Marcus. "I may have information about your family," she wrote. "I've been researching black migration to Philadelphia in the 1890s, found records that might match." Patricia had discovered Mother Bethlehem church records listing Joseph Harris Carpenter, joining August 1898, with 3 children, James, Elizabeth, William. Ages don't quite match your Montgomery records. These children listed slightly older could be intentional misrepresentation. What caught my attention was notation. Family relocated from Alabama, following death of wife and mother. Marcus's pulse quickened. Joseph had fled Montgomery after Ruth's death, taking children north to Philadelphia, where they could truly disappear. Philadelphia in 1890s had substantial black community, with established churches, schools, mutual aid societies, skilled carpenter could find steady work. Children could attend better schools than Southern options. Most importantly, Philadelphia was far enough from Georgia that Thornton Estates' reach would be limited. Marcus found additional records showing Joseph Harris operating small carpentry business in Philadelphia's 7th Ward, 1899 to 1911. Business appeared moderately successful, employing several workers by mid-1900s. Property records showed Joseph purchased small house in 1905, first time owning property in his own name, even if that name remained false. After decades of bondage, contracts, and fear, Joseph Freeman finally owned something. The children's records were harder to trace. James attended Philadelphia public schools through 1895, then disappeared. Likely began working after mother's death. Elizabeth appeared through 1898. William through 1902. What happened after? Did they know their real family name? Did Joseph tell them about Riverside, the escape, the life they'd fled? Marcus found possible answers in unexpected place. Death certificate from Philadelphia, 1918. Joseph Harris, age 64, carpenter, died of influenza during epidemic. Survived by sons James and William. No Elizabeth mentioned, suggesting she'd married, changed surnames, moved away, or died. The certificate listed Joseph's birthplace as Virginia, a lie since plantation records clearly showed him at Riverside since 1875. Likely born in Georgia or sold there young. Even in death, Joseph maintained false identity, protecting his children. His real name, real history, courageous escape, all buried with him under Harris' name. Marcus felt profound sadness for man who'd lived entire adult life hiding, never able to claim his true identity, never recognized for extraordinary courage. Joseph Freeman had escaped slavery twice. First in 1865 when emancipation supposedly freed him, then again in 1889 when he took real freedom for himself and his family. Patricia Holmes made crucial breakthrough. Searching Riverside records more carefully, she found document Marcus initially overlooked, marriage record from 1877. Joseph Freeman, aged 23, Ruth Williams, aged 21, both contracted workers of Riverside Plantation, Burke County, Georgia, marriage approved by estate management. Freeman and Williams, their real surnames recorded in Plantation's meticulous documentation. Joseph Freeman and Ruth Williams, who became Joseph and Ruth Harris, who risked everything saving their children from bondage. Marcus traced Ruth Williams through plantation records, finding her listed as arriving Riverside in 1876, transferred from another property. Before that, trail disappeared into Reconstruction chaos. Joseph Freeman's history went slightly further, purchased by Riverside's owner in 1875 from Virginia Plantation, brought south for carpentry skills. Marcus finally knew who they truly were. Not just fugitives, not just the Harris family, but Joseph Freeman and Ruth Williams Freeman. Real people with real names who'd been stolen, sold, contracted, and finally freed themselves. In March 2019, Marcus published findings in Journal of American History, The Freeman Family Portrait, Fugitive Freedom and Hidden Evidence in a Reconstruction-Era Photograph. Article included high-resolution images showing scars clearly alongside plantation, records, reward notices, trail of evidence showing escape and rebuilt lives. Response was immediate and overwhelming. Historians recognized significance. Photographic evidence of escaped debt peonage workers. Documentation of system keeping black people enslaved decades after Civil War ended. News outlets nationwide picked up the story. Studio portrait appeared on front pages, television, social media. Ruth's partially hidden scars, invisible 129 years, now testified to millions about reality of post-Civil War freedom. Educational programs incorporated Freeman family story into curricula about Reconstruction, debt peonage, long struggle for actual freedom, extending far beyond 1865. Montgomery Historical Society organized exhibition Hidden Freedom, The Freeman Family and the Price of Escape, Thousands came viewing evidence of courage preserved in simple family photograph. Marcus wanted more than academic recognition. He wanted descendants of Joseph and Ruth Freeman. Did any of their children's children survive? Did anyone carry forward the Freeman name, or had it remained buried under Harris alias? Patricia helped search Philadelphia records for James. Elizabeth William Harris found James listed in city directories as carpenter, like his father, operating small business until death in 1945. William appeared as railroad worker, dying 1951. Elizabeth remained elusive until they found marriage record from 1899. Elizabeth Harris, to Robert Thompson, Philadelphia school teacher. Through marriage records, death certificates, birth records, census data, Marcus and Patricia slowly traced descendants forward through 20th century. Some remained in Philadelphia. Others moved to New York, Chicago, Detroit during Great Migration. Family had branched and spread, not apparently aware of true family history. Marcus's article caught attention of Diana Thompson in Chicago. She contacted him through Historical Society. Your article mentioned Elizabeth Harris in Philadelphia in 1890s. Diana wrote, "Could this be my great-great-grandmother? We have family stories about Philadelphia, but nothing before that." Marcus and Diana spent weeks comparing records, tracing genealogies, confirming connections. Eventually, evidence became undeniable. Diana Thompson was great-great-granddaughter of Elizabeth Freeman, daughter of Joseph and Ruth Freeman, who escaped Riverside Plantation in 1889. Diana had grown up knowing family came from Philadelphia, but nothing about deeper history. Nothing about Georgia or Alabama or desperate escape. Marcus sent Diana copies of everything: studio portrait, plantation records, reward notices, documentation of ancestors' courage. Diana called after receiving materials, voice shaking. "I'm looking at my great-great-grandparents right now. Joseph and Ruth. Never knew their real names. We always thought Harris was our original family name. Never knew they were fugitives. Never knew about the scars." She paused. "My great-grandmother Elizabeth died when I was young, but I remember she used to say something strange. Remember, we paid for our freedom twice. I never understood. Now I do. They were born into slavery, supposedly freed in 1865, then had to escape again in 1889 because freedom was a lie." Marcus helped Diana connect with other descendants. They found relatives nationwide. Dozens descended from Joseph and Ruth Freeman, unaware of full story. In November 2019, 23 descendants gathered in Montgomery for family reunion and memorial service. They stood together at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Joseph and Ruth first felt safe, enough joining community under assumed names. Diana spoke, holding large print of studio portrait. "Our ancestors Joseph Freeman and Ruth Williams risked everything for us. They escaped from system designed to keep them enslaved forever. They lived in constant fear of discovery, but they did it so their children could grow up truly free." Diana continued addressing the gathered descendants. "This photograph is evidence of their courage. Ruth's scars are visible because she wanted someone someday to know the truth, to understand what freedom cost, to remember it wasn't given freely. It had to be taken, fought for, protected every single day." The family commissioned a memorial marker to be placed in Montgomery, near where a photography studio once stood in memory of Joseph Freeman and Ruth Williams Freeman, who escaped from bondage in 1889 to build a life of freedom for their children. Their courage preserved in a photograph. Their legacy lives on in us. Marcus attended the ceremony, watching descendants gather around marker, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of people declared dangerous fugitives for wanting freedom, all living the life Joseph and Ruth fought to create. Existence without fear, without contracts, without someone claiming to own their labor. After ceremony, Diana approached Marcus. "Thank you for seeing what no one else saw for 129 years, for looking closely enough to notice my great-great-grandmother's scars, for caring enough to find the truth." Marcus shook his head. "Ruth wanted someone to see. She made sure evidence was there. I just happened to be the one who finally looked closely enough." The memorial became pilgrimage site for descendants and others moved by the story. People came from across country to see the marker to understand what Joseph and Ruth had risked. Local schools organized field trips, teachers using the Freeman family story to teach students about Reconstruction's reality. The studio portrait traveled to museums nationwide. First the Montgomery exhibition, then Atlanta, Chicago, Washington, D.C. At each location, historians searched their own archives for similar photographs, finding dozens showing evidence of continued bondage, debt peonage, sharecropping, exploitation. Decades after 1865, Freeman portrait had opened door, revealing how much history had been hiding in plain sight. American Historical Association issued statement acknowledging Reconstruction narrative had been incomplete and that slavery's end was far more complicated and prolonged than previously taught. Textbook publishers began revisions. Churches across South organized oral history projects, recording testimonies from elders who remembered family stories about decades after emancipation. The stories poured out generations of trauma and survival, finally being documented. But most powerful impact was on Freeman descendants themselves. Diana Thompson became speaker and educator, traveling to schools and universities sharing ancestors' story. She always brought copies of Studio Portrait, pointing out scars her great-great-grandmother deliberately left partially visible. Ruth Freeman wanted us to know, Diana would tell audiences. She couldn't write down the truth. She probably couldn't write at all. She couldn't leave letters or diaries. But she had this photograph, and she made sure it contained evidence. Those scars were her testimony, preserved for 129 years, until someone finally saw them and understood. The Freeman family story challenged comfortable narratives about American freedom. It forced confrontation with reality that emancipation was process, not event. And for many black families, true freedom came not from government proclamation, but from dangerous acts of self-liberation. Joseph and Ruth Freeman hadn't waited for system to grant freedom. They seized it, knowing risks, choosing children's futures over their own safety. Marcus often thought about that choice, about what it took away from Riverside Plantation in darkness of March 1889. Joseph and Ruth had 3 children to protect. No money, no resources, every reason to believe they'd be caught and punished. But they went anyway, traveling 100 miles on foot, hiding during day, moving at night, driven by absolute conviction that anything was better than raising children in bondage. And they succeeded. Their children grew up free, attended schools, learned trades, built lives of their own choosing. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren became teachers, doctors, artists, activists, living dreams Joseph and Ruth fought to make possible. The photograph remained Marcus's daily reminder why historical research mattered, why looking closely at past was essential, why stories needed telling even when challenging comfortable myths. Every time he looked at that studio portrait, he saw Joseph's protective presence, Ruth's carefully positioned wrists, children's serious faces. He saw courage and fear and hope and determination, all captured in single moment. Scholars began publishing related research building on Marcus's work, studies examining debt peonage systems across South, documenting how many black families remained enslaved under different names decades after 1865. Genealogists helping other families discover their own hidden histories of escape and survival. Photographers examining historical images with new awareness, finding similar evidence in unexpected places. The Freeman portrait sparked a broader conversation about how history gets told, who gets remembered, whose stories are preserved versus buried. It raised questions about complicity. How many white Americans knew that systems like Riverside Plantation existed, but said nothing? How many benefited from legal exploitation of black labor while claiming slavery had ended? Marcus received letters from people across country, many sharing their own family stories of grandparents or great-grandparents who'd escaped similar situations. Stories that had been whispered in families but never publicly told, never documented, never acknowledged in official histories. The Freeman portrait had given permission for these stories to emerge, validation that they mattered and deserved recognition. Diana Thompson organized annual gatherings for Freeman descendants, creating community around shared ancestry. At second reunion in 2020, 47 family members attended, nearly twice the first year's number. More relatives kept emerging as word spread. DNA tests confirmed connections. Genealogical research connected branches separated for generations. The family Joseph and Ruth had fought to protect and free was coming back together stronger than ever. 2 years after Marcus Webb first noticed the scars in that studio portrait, he sat in his university office, surrounded by letters from researchers, students, descendants, people moved by Freeman family story. The photograph had changed how people understood Reconstruction, how they taught history of freedom in America, how they looked at old photographs with awareness of hidden truths. Studio portrait now hung in Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, part of permanent exhibition on debt peonage and struggle for freedom after Civil War. Visitors stood before it daily, reading story, seeing Ruth's scars, understanding what Joseph and Ruth sacrificed, giving their children chance at real freedom. Educational programs nationwide incorporated Freeman family story into curricula. Students learned examining primary sources critically, looking for hidden details, questioning accepted narratives about when slavery truly ended. Photograph became teaching tool, showing how ordinary objects, simple family portrait, could contain extraordinary stories waiting to be discovered. Marcus received emails from researchers who'd begun examining historical photographs more carefully, finding similar evidence of debt peonage, sharecropping exploitation, continued bondage decades after 1865. Freeman portrait had opened a door, revealing how much history had been hiding in plain sight. But for Marcus, most meaningful impact was on Freeman descendants. Diana Thompson traveled to schools and universities, sharing ancestors' story, always bringing copies of studio portrait. Ruth Freeman wanted us to know, Diana would tell audiences. She couldn't write down truth. She couldn't leave letters. But she had this photograph, and she made sure it contained evidence. Those scars were her testimony preserved, 129 years, until someone finally saw and understood. Freeman family story challenged comfortable narratives. It forced confrontation with reality, that emancipation was process, not event. That for many black families, true freedom came from dangerous self-liberation, not government proclamation. Joseph and Ruth Freeman hadn't waited for system to grant freedom. They seized it. Marcus kept a studio portrait on his desk, looking at it daily. Every time he saw something new, Joseph's protective presence, Ruth's determined gaze despite fear, children's serious faces representing hope. The photograph reminded him why historical research mattered, why looking closely at past was essential. One afternoon, graduate student knocked with box of photographs from South Carolina archive. After reading your work, I thought I should examine these more carefully, she said. Marcus smiled, picking up magnifying glass. Let's look together. Because Ruth Freeman's message had been received. Her quiet resistance in that Montgomery studio had opened eyes nationwide to truths hidden over a century. Every photograph deserved second look. Every story deserved telling. Every scar, every mark, every subtle detail might be evidence of courage, survival, people fighting for freedom when freedom was denied. Their story was no longer hidden. Their courage no longer forgotten. Their legacy lived on.